and then IBM gobbled up Red Hat, which is this enormous company. So, there's so many people, but I run into so few of them. So it's really nice to be here, to have JJ reach out, and I'm glad it worked out. And so my name is Colin McNaughton. I'm an Ansible technical marketer within the Ansible sort of the automation business unit at Red Hat. And I've been here, it'll actually be 9 years in February. So I've been with Red Hat for 9 years, just about, kind of, bouncing around to different areas. I started out as support engineer. I moved into sales as a solution architect, and then I moved over to Ansible about 2 years ago. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Colin. It means a lot. Mofi, who are you?
So I'm hopefully I'm Colin's second IBM friend. I'm hoping, and but also Mofi, we have been. So if you have been on the Friday stream for a while, we're almost making it like a series that I show up every Friday. But now JJ and I have been playing around with Ansible, AWX, all that stuff for a couple of internal projects we're working on. And the project itself, the problem we're trying to solve, we have kind of looked around, and looks like AWX is one of the solutions that is going to really work really nicely for us. And we're trying to just do the brainstorming live on Twitch and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And in that effort, we somehow got Colin, because again, he's a true AWX expert, not like us who are just like stumbling through the documentation. So because we're kind of hitting that point where it is looking like a real thing, and we just want to make sure that we talk to someone who knows what they're doing before we actually jump into like a couple of months work, like a work stream, right? So, and again, we're extremely lucky. A lot of people don't have that kind of resource to just get Colin or like expert like him. So we're lucky enough to get him, and we have some questions. Hopefully other people will have similar questions when they go through their AWX journey. And hopefully by having Colin answer this here and now, or at least explain to some degree here and now, the people who are trying to do these things in the future will have a better chance and better expertise by looking at this stream later. So that's why we're here.
Nice. And yes, hi, I'm JJ, developer advocate for the IBM Cloud. That's all I'll say about that. Cool. So let's just start from the very beginning here before we start hacking on some code. And as Colin is drinking a can and probably drinking a drink, I'm going to ask him a question just because that's what you do, right? So Colin, we're playing with AWX. Now, Ansible is a whole ecosystem of things, as we've discovered from our pre-conversation. Can you just give us elevator pitch of where everything is, and then we'll describe what we're trying to do, so then we make sure that we're using the correct portions?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as you hinted at, Red Hat sells a subscription for the Ansible automation platform, right? And we introduced this about a year and a half ago at our Ansible Fest last year. And so we got up on stage and said, hey, look, we're expanding the vision of what automation should look like. Some of those components you're now familiar with. So AWX is the upstream for a component of the Ansible automation platform called Ansible Tower. And so Ansible Tower, or AWX, represents sort of the web UI of job execution, right? And those jobs are playbooks, and playbooks are written in YAML, and YAML is just really text, easy on the eyes, plain text formatting, sort of self-documenting ways. So we take Ansible, which is like simple execution, bundle it in a playbook, create a job, expose that job within Ansible Tower, Ansible or AWX, and now you're able to execute it. It does a lot of other things, like Ansible Tower has role-based access control. It integrates with AD and different authentication mechanisms and things like that. It also implements the REST API. So this is like where Ansible I really see as the glue between all of these different services. We can integrate these things just by using the standard, documented supported APIs from all these different tools. It also you're able to create workflows. So I can make a small playbook here that's gonna create a DNS record or something, and then maybe that one's not going to change over time because it's pretty straightforward, and then I can glue that together with after that's created, create an S3 bucket attach it back to this instance, so I can like put these things in order and connect them via logic. So anyway, Tower and AWX, one component of the platform, but we also use things like, once we start growing our automation, it becomes very important to be able to gauge that growth and like watch its expansion and monitor the expansion or the health of the automation environment. Once we start realizing like how important automation is to us, then we need to treat it just like every other like enterprise service that has its own SLA. And then we manage like DR and recovery strategies and stuff like that. So part of the rest of the platform is like showing back analytics to, how you're executing automation, what value you're getting from it. It also provides like pre-written code snippets through Automation Hub, so it'll distribute certified collections and things like that. So there's a lot of good like hosted services in there that show back the value and allow us to have an automation conversation, not at like the sysadmin and developer level, but start climbing up the ladder and showing leadership that yes, you have an automation initiative. This is how we can provide that benefit up to you.
Nice.
Long answer. Sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it was just a really long elevator ride. What can I say?
Yeah, it was. This is like the Burj, right?
There you go.
Yeah, it was. I mean, honestly, the Burj Khalifa actually, the elevator ride actually is less than a minute, because they have invented a new elevator system that can ride the entire thing in less than a minute.
Yeah.
So
okay, maybe this was like the maintenance elevator or
right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's the one that takes up the like the rod and the cement and all that stuff up.
Yeah.
Top floor.
Why is there a whiteboard in here? This doesn't make any sense. Okay, cool. So from what it sounded like, the idea is when you start using Ansible and then you move to the Ansible Tower / AWX route, it allows you to grow your automation to do more than just the sysadmin developer level. You'll be able to actually start talking to other things, which is not what we're going to be trying to do today or what we are trying to work with. Mofi, in that same length of time on an elevator pitch, what are we trying to do with AWX and Ansible right now?
Well, let's just say what we're trying to do and say how we're trying to do that with AWX and Ansible, right? So what we're trying to do is, so we have, again, in developer advocacy, we teach a lot of workshops and other stuff to people to teach them containers and OpenShift in IBM, both Kubernetes and OpenShift. And for that, we need to actually spin up a lot of these clusters that we provision for the workshop. And as of now, that is a classic sysadmin manual process. We run shell scripts. Recently, there was some attempt to automate where I wrote an application that would use a Go application to use the IBM Cloud API to spin up those clusters. But we're kind of feeling the growing pain of this thing because a lot of people are starting to use it and we're having a lot of use case of this. But now we're thinking we need to have a more robust automation system. And we actually have some final contenders for that particular role. We looked at Tecton, we looked at Jenkins, and we looked at AWX. And each of them have their kind of like strong points because, but we kind of settled down on AWX for a number of reasons. So one of them being the one you said, is completely built on REST APIs. So we could control and maintain the system, not by logging into an UI-based system, but making API calls from some other application. That was one of the things that actually really sold me on the idea of AWX. Number two is, because everything is based on Ansible and it's a more of a common thing, a lot of people have already pre-knowledge about Ansible, we could distribute the work of building those playbooks to the workshop creators. They could create their own Ansible playbook because it's a more of a common knowledge. But if we were to roll out our own system, we would either have to educate a lot of people on how to build artifacts for it, or we would have to do that ourselves. Because Ansible is more like like shared knowledge at this point, because it's so common and it's everywhere, we could use that system to let people build their own things. We just run it. So that's the reason we're looking at AWX, and that's the problem we're trying to solve. And so far, the initial assessment we have done seems like AWX is going to be a great solution, but we are trying to make sure that we are planning. We're not doing an agile, but we're doing a waterfall to figure out actually if it's going to work in the 6-month time, because I feel like agile gets too much props. Sometimes waterfall is a better system.
All right. So let's start looking at some stuff here. You want to bring up one of our environments, Mofi? Kind of go from there.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, again, this is one of the AWX environment we spun up on Kubernetes, and as you can see from all the red, we have truly taken this thing to its paces and tried a lot of different things where many of them actually fail, which is fine. So this is the main dashboard of AWX. Once you create an account or once you create an environment and log in, one thing I'm gonna say though about AWX, it's a cool logo. It's a very very cool logo. This is one of the things I noticed the very first thing where like this looks less like a tech thing, more like a biker gang emblem, which is really cool. Anyway, so here we are, and we have
Colin,
went through
you should send us Colin. You should send us some stickers. Just saying, you should send us some stickers.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll dig some up.
Excellent. This was the again. So again, our purpose of this stream is complete. So thank you for coming, everyone. This was the whole ruse to get some stickers. But okay, let's dig in. So we have gone through the basic UI stuff, whatever we have understood, and again, it's a very clean UI. It has everything in the right place, at least from where I would expect things. So I would start with the very first question, right? Like that we first saw. So I know in AWX, it can run each job we create. There is a way to specify that this job should be able to run concurrently, right? In a system, how do we figure out how many concurrent jobs can we run in the system? Like the total number. So we have some guesses. One of them being in the instance group, we have the main instance group tower. And here in the instances, it says this 20 forks. Is that the magic number we're dealing with here? We're talking about we can run 20 concurrent jobs in the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say, and if you haven't adjusted that, so that slider will overwrite the value in ansible.cfg. And that can be like a per project config file. It could be like the entire, you could set it at, 20 forks for, the installation of AWX or Tower. But then a project could overwrite it and say, I'm actually going to fork up to 50 or 150 or 500, right? So that slider there, and this is one of these things like that's an AWX thing right now, and it's not an Ansible Tower. It's not, part of the enterprise solution. So I haven't messed around with this yet. So I kind of like seeing it. I don't mess with AWX a lot, but what that will do is overwrite that forking value. And the value of forks really just depends on the resources attached to the system. And it's all SSH, right? Or primarily SSH when we're dealing with Linux hosts or network devices or things like that. So it's the limitations. It's like a memory. That's the resource limitation there. Right. So just depends on what you have allocated. And I think it is standard at like 10, 20, or 50. I can't recall. But you'll have to do some like individual stress testing to figure out, what jobs you're running, how long they keep open, like an SSH connection, how many different SSH connections for each, host in your inventory file and things like that.
Okay.
So that, hang on. We're on this still on the same topic. I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to ask this question too. So now that you described how Tower does the work by using SSH to connect out to something to make changes happen on that machine. If I needed to tickle an API to do some stuff like create a new user account or create a new S3 bucket or whatever, right? Is it best to run that on the Tower machine to make that happen? Or is there a concept of like a follower node or something that we have like, hey, connect to worker node 7 and run the Ansible playbook there? Which is like, do you have followers that all talk to Tower, or do you want to run this stuff on Tower and let Tower do all that work?
So it's kind of like, what is your architecture? What is the layout? Where is Tower? Does Tower have access to that API or not? Or do we have to go over to node 75, which is outside, has an interface that can reach out and touch that REST API, right? So if Tower, itself is not publicly accessible, then it's not going to be able to go out and hit the AWS API for creating
Sure.
an S3 bucket. So you might go in, delegate that to another inventory item that does have access to touch that API. Otherwise, you could just in your playbook say localhost and then use the URI module if that's going to work. Just depends on where it is.
Okay. So just to make sure I get this correct, so the idea of you use the way to talk to that bastion node, for lack of a better term. You use your inventory to declare how to talk to where that bastion node is, right? Like you wouldn't put this like hard coded inside your playbook or something. You'd be like inventory blah, always run these playbooks that SSH is in that does the thing to do the thing. Is that a better way of saying it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of, I think you could do it. You could probably do it on a playbook level if you wanted to. Yeah, you could do it on a playbook level if you wanted to, or you could say just for this task, delegate it to. That's actually the key that you would be using is called delegate to, and then the name of that the host that's actually going to execute that API call. So and that could happen for every host within your inventory. Every time it gets to that task, it's always going to call host 3 to run this API call.
Got it. Perfect. Okay, cool. So, all right, Mofi, sorry, I wanted to make sure I got those questions out.
That's a good question too. I mean, that's something we're having to deal with. For example, I mean, let me give you a concrete example, like what the problem we're exactly trying to solve. I think that would solidify if anyone else is listening and kind of not getting the clear picture. So let's say we have this Ansible Tower and AWX running right now on Kubernetes. It's a pod, it's a container in a pod. That's the AWX instance that's running. But let's say we want to run a task that requires to spin up a Docker container to run the actual task. So if you try to run this directly on our task runner, what would end up happening is you were then talking about Docker in Docker, like in a container, you're trying to spin up another container. Instead, if we were to go through an inventory on a different VM, ask the VM to run something, in that VM running the Docker container is going to be a little bit better than trying to run a container in container. And that's the kind of like issues we would be able to solve by using an inventory instead of running everything on localhost. Right, JJ? That's a problem. Would be.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was looking at our notes. I wasn't really paying attention to what you're saying.
Yeah. So okay. So let me ask the next question. And this whole session is going to be asking random question to Colin that we think are going to be useful for us. So if you have any more specific question, drop it on the chat, and we can ask Colin too, hopefully. But so next question is, so AWX has a great particular tool called Workflow, and which we have taken great advantage of over the time. So let's say this is a workflow I have designed, very simple workflow here so far, but so let's say that's the workflow, and we do something in this job, then once this job succeeds, we do something here. And I'm trying to see, like, let's say I want to pass some artifact or some information from job 1 to job 2, right? What is I mean, Ansible, I don't think has an idea of that kind of a thing, like by itself. But what would be a AWX thing that where like output of this job goes to the input of this job, or as some variable onto the next job?
Yeah. So have you tried it? Have you defined a variable in kubeadmin module job that you're trying to reference in the Katie's one?
So I was looking around. I found this one Ansible thing that seemed like it is working. I'm trying to make sure that is the right answer. So it's called set stats, and I set something in set stats as data, and I got that available on the next job as an extra variable that got passed in. So I'm just trying to make sure that that is the way to do it, or I'm not like kind of like doing something that is outside of what AWX ecosystem wants us to do.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one way to do it. You could use set facts and pass in the value. You can also do this like in a playbook. So if you're not using the workflow editor and you want to do this in a playbook, you can run a task, and at the bottom of that task, you say register and give it a name. And that's like instantiating a variable and passing the output of that task into that variable. And then you can use like define more logic in there. So I could say, well, if the S3 bucket was created and it has the value of this, or it has this object contained in there, or whatever, then run this task, or this task is now okay to proceed. So it depends. Like if you want to do it in the workflow visualizer, you can do it through setfacts. You could also just register the output of a task, and then create additional like conditional logic based on the value of that.
So wait, hold on. We're talking about talk about registering a task real quick, or creating a register. I want to make sure that it's something that is very clear, because it seems like that's, at least from the playbooks that we've been looking at, it's a pretty common practice, is registering output as an entity. Well, what is it exactly?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just it's another object, right? It's kind of like it's like a fact, right? And it could be, it's like a JSON dictionary or something. So the common use case I use it for is to say, what is a good one? Happens all the time on like APIs, right? So I was catalog is another one of these components of Ansible automation platform, and it's like a self-service catalog that plugs into Tower. But I don't like clicking through menus to configure a catalog. I want to automate that, right? So when I'm going in to create this new catalog item, it returns immediately. Just like if you were creating an instance on EC2 or something, it returns immediately and says, okay. Well, it's okay that it was, kicked off and created. It's not okay that it's ready. So I will register the output of creating that catalog item or creating that virtual instance, and then I will register it with instance creation or something. And then I will go back and pull it, the output of that task to see, yes, it was created, and it's also responding with, a specific like HTTP code or something that I can register as success, and then I will continue. So you can use registers to also like wait until the value of that contained in that register is updated to, yes, it's created and it's now ready to actually touch and automate or something like that.
Nice.
Cool. Yeah, so I think you touched upon a couple of the things there. So one reason we were actually looking at the workflow over just having everything in a single playbook is that we realized that there are certain playbooks that can be reused in other things. For example, one of the concrete use case was creating a Kubernetes cluster. You want to spin up a new Kubernetes cluster. And after the cluster has been successfully created, we want to do something like different based on some particular criteria. That means this first job that creates the Kubernetes cluster, for the most part, can stay the same. And we just take the output of the cluster and do different things based on that. And if we were to put everything on the same playbook, we would then have to have a lot of different playbooks for that. For the first part, does the same exact thing over and over again. And the second part does something different. That's why we were looking at, can we logically separate them out into different things? And that's where I think the workflow is probably going to be really useful for us.
I agree. I think, sorry, go ahead.
And I was just gonna throw this one little wrench into the whole idea. Is there a way to export workflows, and is there a programmatic way that we could create workflows? Because otherwise we're going to have to create like 30 different workflows, all with the same first task of creating a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah. So there's one thing I wanted to say before this. So, nice. The way you're using workflows, I like that a lot. I like very short and to the point playbooks that handle this one thing, and then we're going to run the next playbook. And that fits really well with the workflow and like workflow visualizer that you have here. And we can chain them together with like on success or on fail logic of each of these playbooks. So then it starts to look more like a programming language. Like we're going to run this one function, and then we're going to call the next function and run that function next, right? So I really like, short to the point playbooks. Like when you look at it, playbook and it's 200, 300 lines long. I feel like there might be something that we could do to condense this and make it more reusable. And that's the whole point. Like, we should be able to just like take these playbooks and ship them to anybody else within our organization, and they should be able to find value in them. So that's just what I wanted to say there. And now the second part, what was the second part? What was your question?
Well, honestly, like I might get hit by a truck one day, and I would love to be able to get these workflows and have in some SCM of some sort, something, just so first of all we have a history of it, and if we needed to programmatically create this over and over and over again, and we just had to change out like one cookbook or playbook name, chef kicking in there, one playbook name, wouldn't that be helpful? Like we haven't been able to figure out a way to export any of this stuff. Is there a way to?
So there's not currently a way to export, though there is a way to create them programmatically. So what you create in the workflow visualizer cannot be exported, but you can create workflows from a playbook. So look for a collection called AWX.AWX, and for the supported one, it would be Ansible.Ansible collection. So it's actually a collection that automates the configuration of AWX or Tower itself.
Oh, interesting.
And one of those in there, the first one will be, the blog that we wrote about it, that introducing the AWX and Ansible Tower collections. And so this one, I mean, we do this all the time because we have like demo environments and workshop environments where they're just going to be configured the same each time. And so not only do we install Tower, but we configure it for that student. We drop in all the relevant credentials and then go in and create projects and source playbooks into those projects. And we'll create, workflows and things on that Tower that the student can just go in and run, or the solution architect can demo or something.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think on this one, this is a little bit of a side. I feel like the Ansible Galaxy like artifact repo is actually quite nice. I have, the instruction for creating a new collection was a breeze, and I was not expecting it to be this smooth of experience to create one as I had one. Well, so let me back up a little bit. So we want to create Kubernetes clusters on IBM Cloud, and there were a few ways to go about doing that, but we finally decided, we want to do it in Ansible native way. So I ended up writing a new Ansible module that does it, and it's now live, and we are actually using it. And for spinning up cluster, it worked. JJ, we tested like 5 times, so it didn't fail yet. So I'm gonna just call it and say it's working. But so the Galaxy, so this is also available through the Galaxy collections. That's why I was just going to bring up that. And so this is one way to, let's say, codify our Ansible work, like the AWX workflows, as well as our, so the ones we create by hand, by dragging and dropping things, we can maybe codify that into this so that we still create it this way. But now if we want to move to a different Ansible instance, we just run this playbook again. All of a sudden we have the same workflow that we created without having to click through things. So this is where you have defined a workflow in playbooks. So now it works. I think another question we're having is, because I know Ansible AWX has everything based on a REST API. And if I were to go to, Zoom is blocking me. If I were to go to staging/API v2, I actually see the REST endpoint for pretty much every single thing I could think of doing in an AWX environment. Here, there is also a REST endpoint for workflow job templates. And it looks like I should be able to also make a post request to this endpoint with my credentials to be able to create a workflow. Is that something you see people do at all? Or is it something we're trying to really go like left field of it to do something really like out of the ordinary that people do here?
No, I don't think that's out of the ordinary. And then, I mean, we sort of built it that way so that you could restore an environment. And maybe like, and this would be like independent of like DR strategy where you're like, you're backing up the database regularly and things like that. But you could just define the configuration of the entire AWX or Tower environment through playbooks, right? And so this is what the collection would do, is probably using this endpoint that you're looking at on the screen. Yeah. And certainly that is the design, right? You should be able to interact with these services however you want it. Developers are going to be far more comfortable interacting with a REST API than they are, clicking through the interface, as gorgeous as it is, right? And as cool as the logo is, it still needs to integrate into these things.
Yeah, so I think on that vein, I have the next question is that I know that AWX have a CLI that it's built on top of Python. Do you know of any work that is being done to almost like expose an SDK for people to integrate these things, or is it almost left upon the developer to use REST API to build this on top? Because again, the code already is there on Python to build the CLI. I think I'm just trying to figure out, because if I were to do this, I probably do this in Go for building some of the part that we need. We just need to be able to get lists of all the playbooks that are available so that we can surface that in a different UI somewhere, or do something like create a new workflow or launch a job from outside, things like that. But I was just trying to figure out if there are any work stream or even any plan or any thoughts behind even exposing some of this as SDKs to be built other applications on top of.
Yeah, there are plans. It's certainly, I don't know if this would be on a public roadmap, but it is something that we're working on, right? So it needs to be like developer friendly. And as you said,
right.
The CLI is there. And we are looking at, creating development environments specifically for Ansible automation platform. And that's sort of one of the things that's we're looking at within that work stream. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, again, this is already giving us so much freedom compared to a lot of the other platforms we looked into, so that I could, in theory, pretty much implement all these endpoints as like a Go SDK. We might even open. I don't know if we're gonna get in any trouble for open sourcing a Go SDK for AWX, like a community Go SDK for AWX. We'll talk about that later. But I think for the stuff we're doing, we don't need the full AWX SDK, to be honest, right? Because AWX, as you said, does so much more than this, just a couple of the things we're looking at. But for the things you're looking at, we'll probably end up writing some rudimentary version of SDK that we'll use internally for our tool. But that'll be interesting to see if there is any work stream that comes public from the thing you're talking about right now. But in any case, like having this REST API, having this documentation laid out in this way already was so much nicer than like us having to dig through all the documentation and all the versions that are available out there in the internet. Okay, so next question. I think we covered a few of them. Okay.
Well, let me just ask a simple question here. Back to the workflows. Is there plugins or some type of notification when something fails? Should we kick off like another playbook that like sends us an email or something? Or what is the considered best way to be notified of failures? If all of a sudden JJ Mofi fails again on this one in front of us, yeah, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean there are notifications built into AWX, so you can go in and configure those, and I think there's it's something like PagerDuty or Slack or email, like all these different integrations into other services that you could do. You could also just on fail, you could run another playbook. And that playbook is either going to tear down the work that you've already done within that workflow. If I'm sure IBM Cloud is the same way, but I'm just more familiar with AWS. You have to tear them down in a certain order, right? You have to remove the instances before you can remove the VPC and all that kind of stuff. So you could have an on failure playbook that starts that tear down process in the right order. And it could also, one of those steps could also be, hit an API that is going to send a message into a specific Slack channel and, at some people that it needs to be looked at. But there are notifications built into AWX, so you can configure those just in the preferences in the web
Well,
UI.
if you were to look at the screen, I actually looked for like the Slack module for Ansible, and the Galaxy has in the community general package has a module for Slack and Slack package. I mean, again, haven't tried it to see if that's the one we need, but it's promising to see, you know, the name there. So it's probably going to be, I mean, if Slack is talking about the famous Slack, like, you know, the SAC run game, that's a different story, but I'm pretty sure this is talking about the Slack tool we know. But yeah, so the Galaxy, the Ansible Galaxy, the repo is actually really great. And if you don't see the community stuff, there are just so many different like packages. Some of them are built by people like myself, but also there are like community packages built from IBM, from Azure, from AWS. They're the community packages for Kubernetes and other tools. This is pretty freaking awesome. And this is one of the things where like having great documentation for people to allow people to, well, empower people to build the tools they need. Now it's available in the community so everybody can use it, which is really great to see.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I love that you're highlighting Galaxy. Like that's what Ansible is all about, is people creating useful things and then being able to share them easily. And Galaxy, I mean, has tens of thousands of roles at this point, and roles are just a thing that, you know, is reusable. And then, you know, as we go into collections, like now we take roles and combine them, you know, with other automation content types like modules. Like, so for instance, we're taking modules which do the real work in Ansible land. Like we're calling a module and passing it some inputs, and then that module written in Python or PowerShell or whatever actually does the work on the endpoint. We're taking modules out of Ansible and then delivering them within collections, which makes it, you know, much more portable. And so you'll start to see those things up in Galaxy, where it's not just the playbooks and the roles anymore, but it's actually the module, it's the Python code that's actually executing this stuff now too.
Yeah, and so I have another question. So for Ansible modules, is Python the only supported language as of now, or is there any other plan to have like some sort of other tools that you could make use of?
You can write modules in pretty much whatever you want.
I don't think that the documentation for it is then widely available, because every time I was looking, I was only seeing Python, and I don't consider myself a Python developer. I can Google things in Python and string together some lines of code that sometimes work, but I would probably, if there's an option to use some other languages, probably would have been great, because all the examples I saw was either just like, so another thing about Ansible collection, correct me if I'm wrong here, you could create a collection by not writing any code, but just like combining a bunch of modules together in an interesting way to make a new collection, or you could write a collection from scratch by writing code. And in the Galaxy repository, examples of both are pretty abundant, right? You have people writing new modules and creating a collection from that, or people using existing module in interesting ways to create this like curated experience that you can just use as a collection. And both are pretty common, but all the examples I have seen of code so far have been Python. So it leads me to believe that's the, if not the only way, the most common way people build it, which makes sense. But if there is any documentation you have available where people are writing modules or instruction for writing modules in other ways and transpiling, compiling, or packaging them into Ansible modules, that would be actually really helpful. Not only for me, which would be, but also for probably other people who are not as versed in Python, but are interested in using it in some other language. So that's another thing. Okay, so
I'll have another question for Colin as we're throwing more and more questions at him. Though I think we're getting close to the end, which is good. So, Colin, in the chef world, we had something called Test Kitchen that allowed us to spin up a VM to run changes on a VM on your machine, so you could iterate quickly. What is the prescribed way, or what is the way from the Ansible world? Can I have that type of workflow? Because, or do I just spin up a VM and just keep shotgunning the same playbook at it over and over again, and then run something like server spec or something like that afterwards to verify it's in the state I want. What is the correct path there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different things we could talk about. So, I mean, in documentation, you can just, it's in the developer guide, I think, and it's testing Ansible. So that's a good place to kind of check out, you know, running tests against your playbooks and things like that. You can also run them like in check mode, so you can see, you know, what will change when you execute that. I mean, that's a little bit further on down, but you can see some different strategies in there for like sanity testing, integration unit testing, and things like that. So that's a good place to start. We also, we will write tests. I help maintain our Ansible workshops, which is a really cool, and I'll plug that. I'll send a link in chat for it. Of course, it's just on GitHub. It's all open source, and you can look through all these these examples there. But what we do is run tests for all of the playbooks that we're actually using to create the student workshops and workshop environments on the cloud. So it's Ansible driving Ansible, and we wrote tests for everything in there that run through CI every night. So, you know, Jenkins kicks off, and it's going to run the provisioner that provisions a student environment. And then we can also test to make sure that if a student were going through these exercises, that the exercise would actually pass. And so we do all of that in version control, right? So this is kind of coming back to that infrastructure as code. We want every time a PR on our project repository that has all of our playbooks in, we want that to be constantly testing and checking overnight before we promote anything into the main branch or something like that. But that testing page is a really good place to start. And then we could also talk about like how do we write our unit tests and things like that, and how do we have Jenkins configured to go out and run our provisioner and make sure it's not broken. There's a Ansible test and Ansible lint out there as well that will help you. And a lot of people use Molecule, which will spin up a container environment and check check the playbook.
I played with Molecule for a little while, but it felt like it was doing more roles than it was like individual playbooks to do a thing. It was expecting a lot more. So I didn't feel very comfortable, for at least what I was trying to do at the time, with that. Though I did like the container idea, which is something. What I've done is I just split a window with Tmux and I value mount a container into the playbook, and I just run Ansible inside of that as I'm hacking on the thing at the bottom to make sure it's in the state that I want to before I shove it off to another VM.
Yeah. And I'm a command line guy, so I'm mostly in Vim when I'm writing playbooks and roles and stuff. And I've got it set up just to my liking, but a lot of people also will use VS Code, and VS Code, you're able to ship Ansible playbooks over SSH, or it'll spin up a container on your local host and then test playbooks and roles through there. So there's really good like IDE integration through VS Code for it as well. Red Hat actually wrote, no, I can't remember. I think Microsoft is actually the author of the Ansible integration within VS Code. Yep. The extension there. So they're big users of Ansible as well.
Nice. All right, Mofi.
I just had a question that just escaped my mind, like not on the list, but I just had a great question that I just thought of, then it just like escaped. Oh yeah, got it. Okay, so let's say I'm doing something in an inventory, right? Like I want to do something like Kubernetes stuff using the shell kubectl stuff in a different machine. But let's say I only have one inventory, one of these VMs that I'm controlling from my AWX instance, but I want to run 30 different Kubernetes related things on that VM. Is there any kind of isolation from AWX side that lets me run 30 concurrent jobs on that same VM without stepping on each other?
Yes, I'm trying to think of how you would do it.
You can't. Didn't like my joke? Didn't like my joke, Colin?
You didn't see it.
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, there you go. Nice.
No, that's very good. Thank you. I should have some of those. Yeah, so there is a way. Actually, can you go pull up one of the templates?
Okay. Let's open up create namespace. Why not? Okay, here we are.
Yeah, so check out the enable concurrent jobs over there and hover over the question mark. Okay, so we'd be able to run this concurrently. We can also like do asynchronous tasks as well. So I will do this if I need a bunch of packages installed sometimes. So if I'm working on RHEL, I'm using Yum or the package module to say install, these 500 packages that I need in this environment. And so I will do that, but Yum takes time, and the network connection, maybe that takes more time and adds more latency. But I want to do some other system configuration stuff that's apart from package installs, and I can do some other things while I'm waiting. So I will kick that task off using async, and then it'll just say, okay, that task is started. Let's move on to the next task. When I've completed all the tasks that I can do without needing those packages installed, I'll have a task that says, okay, now pull the status of that package installation task and let me know if it's finished successfully or not. And I can just wait there until it reports a successful completion, and I can do it that way. So there's nothing stopping you from running all these different tasks asynchronously, and then just at the end of the playbook, checking to make sure that they completed successfully, or run some additional tasks based on the output from that one job that was running async.
So let me try to rephrase the question. I mean, the thing you said is actually really useful, and I'm going to try to find out how to do that, the async stuff, because there are certain tasks we have that's going to be really benefiting from doing them async. But I think the question I was trying to have is, so the use case is we want to install Cloud Pak that runs on OpenShift, and we have to do OC commands. And this takes really long time. It takes up to 30 minutes to 2 hours to install all the different steps. And the VMs we're running these commands on, that is not the target of those changes. We use the VM almost like as a jump SSH to install on a bunch of actual OpenShift clusters that are somewhere else. So one VM we are running OC commands on to install this thing on 30 different OpenShift clusters, right? On the same VM. So my question was more around each playbook task. Are they isolated on their own way, so that, let's say I set up my OC login on one of them, does it override OC login for the entire VM or just for the playbook?
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm trying to think of how you would do that. You'd almost...
And that is the reason we actually initially looked at the container group, for instance. And this is, again, those of you who are in the AWX world, you probably have seen this. This container group right now is in tech preview in AWX. So it's not the most stable thing as of yet. And we ran into some issues, some errors we found. We can probably show some of the errors we saw. I think what I'm thinking the error looks like is that the container from the tower, from AWX, you send the job by encoding the job in some sort of format to send it to the container. And when the container tries to unpack or recreate the job from that encoding, it fails on some sort of weird characters. And it doesn't fail constantly. Sometimes the job would pass and sometimes it would fail. So we can't necessarily use this in a constant manner. That's why we kind of decided not to touch container as of yet. If we could do this in a container, this would be a breeze, because each container we know for a fact is isolated in their own. And that would be perfect. But as of now, I don't think the container group is stable enough where we can say, you know what, do everything on a container and run containers within containers. So let me find an example. For example, this is a kubeadmin module job that failed. Well, this failed for something else. That's not useful. Okay, so kubeadmin workflow on a container. So this had failed, and oh no, that's the same job. This is just the workflow. Damn it, can't even find what failed. Hold on, I'll find it. Okay, I think this is the one. Yeah, here we go. So this is like an error we would see, and it looks like the job was encoded in this like giant base64 like string, and that tried to decode that back into the container, and that's when it failed. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Probably will end up opening some issues with the Ansible runner project that's working on this and trying to see something. Because if this were to work constantly for us, this would have been such a perfect solution. Like this would have just like solved so many of the other underlying issues for us. But I'm glad that the work is being done on this particular work stream, and really happy. At maybe even not now, maybe in few months future, if we come back to this, we'll have this like more, at least in alpha or beta, where it's going to be more stable. Anyway, so
Yeah.
this would have been the perfect solution for us, but now we're looking into the other way. So one way I thought we can solve this, and you can tell me if I'm completely crazy for thinking like this. So one way we thought is, instead of trying to run the work on the VM directly, within the VM we spin up Docker containers to do the work. And that is basically kind of doing the same thing, but we control the entire thing. We don't have a runner that does it. We just spin up a Docker container and we run the workload within the container. And I think that would, for the most part, would work. We shouldn't have any issue with the network or anything, because we don't really are running. We're not running it under some sort of firewall, so it should technically just work.
Yeah, no, so I think that's a very solid use case for container groups, because it's just creating these. I mean, if you do it from a VM, like you would have to create these different these different environments, right? Somehow create an environment with its own set of environment variables and configurations and stuff like that. But that's what a container is, just like a section off small environment. So I think that is probably the prime use case for container groups. I would probably look to do the same on a VM for your specific use case, just spinning up containers to then run those individual tasks where you have to configure OC login for each one of the nodes, and it's probably, or each one of the environments, and it's going to be different. You could also wonder if you could have a task that loops through the different environments and passes in an environment variable as it's running the task, which would just, it would run on one cluster or one environment at a time, so it wouldn't overwrite them. I'd probably want to look at the playbook and figure that one out. That one's kind of tough to talk through, but I agree with you. I think container groups would be a solid answer to that.
We can always fake the container groups out though. Like to what Colin was just saying, couldn't we have like a VM with like Docker install or whatever on it, and the playbook SSHs over to the machine with Docker on it, and then we use like the Docker resource or whatever to spin up the container, right, and we inject our environment variables in that with everything we need, and we can just do that like this.
Right. I mean, that's the solution we'll probably end up implementing. But I was like, as Colin also was mentioning, that if container group was probably meant for exactly this very specific problem, like that's probably why it was designed in the first place. Maybe there's some other reasoning behind, but like looking at how container groups actually work or how it spins up, it looks very much like this is one of the core use cases for it. And and the other thing you mentioned, Colin, that like run it and wait for the thing. The issue with that we have is that we spin up these clusters for workshop that are, let's say, happening tomorrow or the day after, and each of those setup takes up to 30 minutes to 2 hours. So if you were to do it on order, and if you have 30 of these things to be done, it's going to take 60 hours in the upper case for 30 clusters. Right. And it could take longer depending if something gets stuck somewhere. So being able to do this in like one after another, that would be probably like easy to do, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problem we're trying to solve in the first place. So, but again, there are certain use cases where doing this synchronously is probably the most easiest to reason about usually, because async and parallel tasks are one of the difficult problems to debug when there's problem with it. So
Yep.
I mean, that's something we'll probably play with a little bit more to figure out, understand a little bit more, because having a VM that already has Docker set up so that you don't have to run the task to install Docker over and over, that would be ideal. And we will learn more as we go forward with it and as you build more things with it. Let me see if I mean, we're almost at the top of the hour. I know you have to leave for some other business you have to take care of. So
wait. I have to ask the other question.
Yeah.
So can you go back to templates real quick? Yeah. This has to be like a 101 question, but I really need to ask this. Just go to any of them.
Any of them. Got it. Oh, that's the workflow. That's not a template. Hold on. Oh, no, there is. Actually, no, this is a template. Okay. Yeah.
So you see that playbook line at the top, Colin, where it says playbooks, cubeflow.main.yaml.
Yeah.
And all the different ones. It's a bear to get things to show up properly in that. Is there a specific format you're supposed to put the like, is there a standard template, for lack of a better word, that I could use to build all this stuff? Because I've had a hell of a time trying to get AWX to actually see playbooks that I'm like, for instance, we had to put this one in the folder of something called playbooks instead of like tasks. Like I use the molecule creator, and it creates a tasks directory with a main.yaml in it that you're supposed to use. And it seems that at least AWX, if it has the name of tasks, it can't read it, but you change the word of playbooks, which is not really a playbook because it's a task run. But for some reason, AWX can read it now. Like, are there special words we can't use or something like that? Like, it is very, very, very frustrating.
That is some feedback I've gotten recently as well. I mean, I know there is documentation around it, and I'm trying to think of a better way to word it. But yeah, I mean, there are some reserved keywords, right? In any sort of like any sort of like programming language or whatever, right? And I don't know that is. I don't think there's any like reserved thing for this specific dropdown, right? But there is a directory structure that you have to adhere to so that it can find these playbooks for you. You could also have like a playbook that simply like includes tasks if you wanted to, and just pass a path within include tasks back to that tasks file if you wanted to. But there is a specific directory structure that it has to be in to actually expose itself in that dropdown. I can find the link to the docs for that too.
Yeah. So okay, cool. So first of all, you've confirmed that I'm not crazy, right? Because that was really weird when I get the template for module, I take the direct template that I've written in module that tests and works, put it into AWX, and it's like, no. And I'm like, what? Not cool, bro. And then Mofi was like, just change the name. And I did, and it worked. And I basically table flipped and walked away because, spending 2.5 hours trying to, anyway, you get the point.
Yeah. I feel like that like if that documentation was kind of like front and center when you're trying to create project, I feel like we found it out by trial and error, which is not the best developer experience. And it could be common knowledge if you are like deep into the Ansible community. But for us, I feel like we came to Ansible from the promise of AWX, not by directly looking at Ansible, and which is probably not as common of a user entry for AWX, where people use AWX by using Ansible all the time, and they're like, okay, I want this to be bigger and do more things. I'm gonna go for Tower, or I'm gonna manage it by AWX, right? For us, it was like, okay, AWX looks like it's cool. What does AWX use? Ansible. Let's use it, right? So
it's true.
So I think for us, because we came through that particular channel, maybe it was a little bit more difficult. But I feel like because AWX, and I'm seeing AWX is getting more and more traction, I feel like we need to, at least when I say we, I mean basically you and the AWX team, need to be a little bit more cognizant about the people like us who are coming to the ecosystem and giving us more of a heads up of this is kind of issues you might face, or even having a FAQ page. Like, this is something you might stumble upon. So be mindful of your naming convention. right? Like this is not, we
Yep.
didn't even see why it was failing. So we didn't know, because when it fails, you just don't, when in the drop down, you just don't see anything. It doesn't say anything more. You click this, there is nothing there. Okay, wait, I put everything on my GitHub repo. Yeah, that's a I mean, difficult first day for us there, but after that it was not as bad.
No, that's really good feedback. I mean, Ansible, the growth for Ansible has always been pretty organic, right? And that's how I got into it as, as like a solution architect or sales engineer or whatever. I would demo these different components of, RHEL or some, portfolio product, right? And so I would write the Ansible playbook that I would execute straight from my machine, right? So I came from the space that a lot of our customers do, where it's a system administrator trying to save some time and not stay awake patching applications. Let's start automating that. And then it starts organically growing, saying, another team is like, hey, how did you do that so quickly? Or what happened? How did you just kick this off overnight and you weren't even here to watch it happening, right? And that's when Ansible Tower and the rest of the platform and AWX come in, right? So it is really good feedback to hear from you coming the other direction, which is also a direction that we want to support, right? From like the top down. Let's present, automation as an entire, strategy or initiative, and not just one team, picking off low-hanging fruit and going from there. So no, it's fantastic feedback. I think it might, trying to remember where it is in documentation that kind of goes over this, and it might be in the best practices guide. If it's not, I can find out and I'll send and follow up here as well.
Thank you. Well, yeah. I want to be cognizant of your time. I know you got to go be a dad, and I respect that, because I'm lucky that my kids haven't ran in here and started talking to us while we're streaming. So I respect that. Colin, thank you so much for taking this time with us today. This is meant a ton, and I think what's going to happen. If you want to stop sharing your screen real quick.
Yeah.
I think we just want to say goodbye and thank you, and we'll take a 5-10 minute break, and then we'll come back, and Mofi and I will continue working on this stuff. Hell, if you get bored watching your kids, you can always just put Twitch on your phone and watch us mess around with this stuff for the next couple hours or so.
If you're doing something wrong,
my kids would love that.
Yeah, if you're doing something wrong, just put a comment, be like, that is wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Who's this guy? He's such a dick. Okay.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Yes. Thank you again, and we will be. Thanks for. Please stick around. We'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, and we're back. Thanks everyone for sticking around. Uh-oh. Who's Mofi? No, he's still there.
I'm still here. It's hard to lose me.
There you go. All right. So obviously we've learned a ton here of things that we've had. So what do you think we should talk? Where should we tackle next?
I mean, let's just do a little bit of a retro of what I feel like one of the great thing about that was, sure, like Colin gave us a lot of insights into like how this thing's supposed to work. But one thing I'm actually quite happy about is that his answers didn't veer off too much from what we expected it to, which kind of lets me think that, okay, if we logically think through this problem, the people who build this also had at least some similar thought while building this, which is a great sign always. Like if your intuition starts breaking into some tool, you just know you're gonna have problem long term, because you think something should work some way and then it doesn't do it like that way because in building there are some other issues or something. So this is number one for me, was one of the greatest insight we got from this, that a lot of the problems we jotted down in some note and we took list of questions that we're going to ask him, and below each of the question I put down the answer we think should be the right answer, like the way you should do it. And some of them Colin actually confirmed that yes, that is, we're thinking the right thing, right? And then that is a great sign for us to be able to say, okay, we thought of this problem logically, not from AWX point of view, not from Ansible point of view, just logically, it should work XYZ way. And we're seeing for the 70 to 80% of the time, yep, that is where we're in the right kind of ballpark with the answer.
Yep.
Which tells me that this is a system we can have our intuition work for the most part, which was a great sign for me at least. I don't know what was you have any other.
No, it's and it sounds like we're completely in line with what's going on. I feel like there's a couple things we could do. Like, okay, so first of all, we never actually got to the point where I mentioned this in our pre-talk. Didn't actually do this during the stream, which is he wants to do a stream about collections with us, building that one that you're talking about.
Perfect.
Because he seems really excited about that.
I mean, I have my memory of a collection is quite fresh because I have done that 18 hours ago.
There you go. And then, but yeah, so what's a low hanging fruit do you think we can spend the next hour or so working on?
Well, since the last time, so if you were here last week or watched the replay last week, right, we were doing a bunch of different things. Well, let me rephrase. We were struggling with a bunch of different things to connect to a Kubernetes cluster and do X, Y, and Z things in the Kubernetes cluster. Since then, we have come a long way, I would say, because all the questions we're having, if you noticed, were around like scalability or like long-term usability of this product, not on functionality anymore. Because since then to now, we have proved to ourselves that this is functionality-wise, this would do what we want it to do. So maybe today, we can together go over some of the things we have achieved from then till now so that people get a realistic idea of how soon they can go from knowing what the word AWX means to building this kind of stuff, because that's exactly what we have done in the past few days, right? So I think that would be something like, it's more of a realistic view. If you were to pick on AWX and Ansible for your own project, what kind of timeline are you looking into for building something useful with it, right?
Sounds good.
I think, yes. So I'm gonna share my screen again here. And if you remember last week, we were using something like this, where we're passing in Kubernetes authentication this way to be able to do something on install a namespace, I believe. So if I were to quickly go back and show you the playbook itself that achieves this, would be here. I have this playbook. I have this Kubernetes workflow. Is it that? Maybe. I don't know. Let me look at it. Yeah, so that is a workflow. Well, that is the kind of like the thing we're trying to, well, it's not the same workflow anymore. So let me move back a little bit. So what is this? Okay, so this is one of the things we tried doing, right? So we're expecting to have the Kubernetes configuration already preset. We're trying to then do some things with the Kubernetes module, which is of course part of the community Kubernetes collection. If you want to look at the code or look at the thing, you can just look for Ansible community Kubernetes GitHub. Which I really love about this is like every single code base here are open source here as well. So you can always go back. And one of the things is because it's written in Python, if you're a Python developer, you're interested in doing something with Kubernetes, it's not only useful for Ansible, now you can actually look at this code to do something directly using Python and Kubernetes for something completely different because it's open source, it's already there for you, which is pretty useful. But again, you have the Kubernetes module here that you can see how it works, what it does. It uses the Kubernetes raw module, which is available somewhere as well, like here. Again, that's completely like a side thing, but it's super useful because now you can see if you're interested in tinkering with Kubernetes directly using Python, you have like a really well-written code base available for you for open source, which is, I find, like a really beautiful thing in open source. Anyway, so that's something we were doing last week, but to get the configuration passed to my cluster, what we were doing is we're doing some, I'm not gonna say hacky way, but some workaround to generate that token and the cert by using like a cluster role on our cluster and all that. But since then, I have found a couple of different ways to figure this out. One of them being, what you could do is use again, we're doing this in IBM Cloud. So there's a collection for IBM Cloud. You're using that collection and we are finding the IBM container cluster info by using our cluster name. And with that, we can find the cluster info, things like clusters, what the cluster is, and then use that info to download the cluster config. So if you are familiar with IBM Cloud CLI, you can do IBM Cloud KS cluster config, name of the cluster, that will download the kubeconfig file for you on your local machine. And you can do the same thing with this module. So we do that. And once you do that, we basically set stat. That is the way I found you can pass information from one Ansible job to the next one in AWX workflow. So what I'm doing is I'm setting the resource to do that. And then we'll just take this resource and set up my kubeconfig that way. And now I can take Kubernetes actions. Let me see which one exactly would this be. So I'm sure I deleted some of these things. I need to clean this up a little bit more. But I have done this this is a workflow. I think this is the one. Could be. Let me see. What are the tasks in this? Man, our naming was terrible.
Really
like
was.
Last week. Yeah, last week JJ and Mofi was a dick.
Yeah, it really was. God, didn't do anything right. Anything.
Yeah, damn it. Anyway, so let's see what the JJ Mofi task is all about. I think we can figure out. Okay, this is the print. This does nothing. This is terrible. Hold on, I'm gonna have to do the difficult task of finding. All right, this is the create. Excellent. So this is the task that we're going to use to get. So this cluster, I actually deleted this cluster. So let me find a cluster that I don't want to spin up a new cluster now. So I'm gonna find a cluster that exists and I'm gonna take actions on that cluster. Okay, wait, what account is this? A different account. Oh, there you go. I remember back in the days when I used to have only one account. Those are simpler times.
Really was.
Those are simpler times, JJ.
So, but by the way, the Kubernetes admin's down.
It is?
Yep.
Oh boy. No, it's not.
What? I get a server not found.
Oh, I think, okay, so you have to clean your DNS cache because I moved it from the thing to thing. So you're probably still targeting the old cluster.
Okay.
So I moved, so I redeployed on a different cluster. Again, if you are getting confused by this particular thing that's happening right now, we have a tool which was running on one Kubernetes cluster. Yesterday, I migrated that to a different Kubernetes cluster for different reasons. But JJ's computer probably have a DNS cache that is looking for the same resource on the same one, the same IP address, which is, I mean, so what would be the solution to that problem? Is that using like a global load balancer on top?
Yeah, I think
Something like,
so.
okay.
And right now it's higher than just my machine DNS, it seems, because I tried a different browser. So this will be interesting.
It's not your machine. It's your, so I think your router has a DNS cache. So if you try
Oh,
it
good
from your
point.
phone or
Yeah.
something, yeah, if you try
Okay.
from your phone or something, or different network, or give it some time, it'll take some time to
There we go.
propagate
Yeah,
everywhere.
it just did.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
if you try a few times, it'll be like, okay, why is this user trying so many times? Let me invalidate this DNS cache. I was watching, again, completely unrelated to what we're doing today, but I was watching a video about how this whole DNS stuff work. This thing is such a giant like duct tape and glue system. I'm not.
Oh, it is.
It's,
The whole
like,
internet is duct tape and glue. It is. The more you learn about this stuff, the more you realize like how much the world relies on the internet to get things done. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you can just like re-advertise a bunch of BGP routes to China and the internet will just go through China for the next 6 hours. It just could. Just
yeah,
why not?
I was talking to another colleague of ours, and I was joking that if we could maybe shut down like internet for like about a year and like get all the big companies in the same room, or not all the big companies, all the people in the tech in the same room, and be like, okay, we're building the new internet without having any backward compatibility. We're just building it from scratch with the latest of security, latest of all the convention. How long is going to take? They're going to be like, okay, 1 year. Everybody stops doing literally everything. All the businesses stop. We're going to put all the engineers of the world working on this one project of fixing the internet for 1 year. And then we're going to restart the world again with better internet. That's it. That's the only way to do it.
Isn't that what COVID's doing to us? Heyo.
No,
Topical.
I mean, COVID
topical humor.
The issue is COVID shut us down, but actually nothing stopped. We're just not going anywhere. The only people that got in trouble because of COVID was like travel agencies. Other than that, everything else. Okay, you know what? This is too much things. I'm not gonna do it this way. I'm gonna actually show the thing I wanted to show in the first place. So we tried doing that. That had its own issues. For example, some of the things I didn't have control. So I was, you know what? I'm gonna build this myself, like every self-reliant engineer does. Which is a terrible idea, right? Building things yourself, because anything you build becomes dead in like about 6 hours. But in this case, because it's a project, it's very fundamental to our thing. Having full control over was very important to us, because this whole project is around the idea that we're going to create cluster, do some work on the cluster, and give access to people. And create cluster is literally the step number one. So if we don't have the control over creating the cluster, if you're relying on things that we don't know works 100% of the time, that is going to be a terrible thing for us in the long run. So what I ended up doing was creating an Ansible collection, and maybe we'll come back some other time talking about building the collection process, which was honestly a fresh, what is the called? Breeze of air? I don't know what that word thing is. But
fresh breath of air.
Yeah, fresh breath of air. Yeah, it was great because I felt like the documentation was on point, and the support and the examples, because of the Galaxy, all the code, you can just search anything here. And if you think like this particular person's module, I don't know who that is, but if you think this particular person's module is like the bomb and you want to see exactly how they did it, you just go to the GitHub repo. Now you can see how they did it, which is brilliant. Nice. One thing though, if you see the structure in this structure, this is the older way of building collections, which was mainly by taking on like packaging bunch of roles into one thing. If you want to see like a newer example of what a collection looks like, for example, this one, this would be the new structure of building collections. Again, I picked one of the biggest collection out there anyway, but like this would be, so your structure would look similar. You will have a Galaxy file, galaxy.yaml, that will define exactly who are the authors, what are the dependency, what tags do you have there, what versions you're dealing with, and all that stuff. Anyway, so, and my collection also has the similar structure. We'll go over creating a collection from scratch at maybe next week or some other time. Anyway, so let's talk about what we finally did. and Kubernetes workflow. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
Could
And
be.
let me see what are the work. No, that's not it. That's still wrong. Oh my God, I keep going back to this. Okay. The kubeadmin module. These are the two things. Sure. Kubeadmin flow. I named it kubeadmin flow. Rightly so.
You really should. You know the ones that we don't need anymore. How about you delete those? By the way, you need
That
to
is
change your key now.
Yeah, I that key is it's going away after today. I created it like last night, so it's fine.
Okay.
After today's stream is going away, so no one steal anything from my account. Anyway, so all the things we're not using, damn, that's tough. So print, I don't care anymore. I think we realize you can print stuff with Ansible. I think we agree. Terraform create, that didn't go anywhere for us. So this is one of the tasks we tried creating. What we tried doing was going to a machine, install Terraform from scratch, install a plugin from scratch, and then try to run Terraform, which was a terrible idea to do because
it was
adding a lot of overhead. And again, nothing against Terraform because Terraform is a great tool, but like that particular way we're trying to use Terraform was a bit really convoluted and wasn't like the best solution for the time. This naming is terrible. I'm going to get rid of JJ Mofi. As much as I love that name, I'm going to get rid of it because it says nothing about anything. If you see any task with this @ symbol, this is a funny thing. If you copy any of the tasks, it just adds a timestamp after. So these two are copies, so we don't need them either. I'm going to delete them. I'm going to delete this one as well. And then workflow and container, that didn't go anywhere because we're going to have to come back to that at some point though. So kubeadmin module job. I'd say that's the job. So we're going to have to keep this. These three are the ones we care for. Demo job template, we don't care for it anymore. This is the one that comes built in. Create namespace, we have done it like 300 times. It works, whatever. Create cluster and get config. This also works, but so I'm going to get rid of this one because this references job. Another thing I think we have to kind of ask is that if you delete a job template that some workflow depends on, is there any way automatically cascade delete that? Because right now it doesn't seem like it does that.
Probably not.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I know for a fact it doesn't because I just deleted something. For example, oh, okay, it shows it's deleted here, but it doesn't do anything to it. I mean, maybe we can talk to the team to maybe have some question mark or something here. Anyway, so pretty much deleted everything that was here. So the three job we're going to care about is this three. And let's say we're going to have the kubeadmin module job. That is this one. Yes, that is the one. Excellent. And this also have my API key. That's fine. So I'm going to create a cluster called Good Luck, Have Fun. And we did that. Well, I'm going to good luck cluster. It's a good luck cluster. I'm hoping this is going to work out. This is all the information I need to create this particular cluster on this account and the resource ID and all that jazz. So what I'm going to do now is go to this cube, and I have this other task. What this does, it goes to this endpoint, and I'm gonna show you what this does in a second. This, after the cluster has finished creating, after the cluster has been finished creating, what we do is we create a namespace. That's it. We create the namespace my app on that particular cluster. So that's pretty much all we want to do. Okay, so I'm gonna kick this job off. This one. And this is gonna take however long it takes because we're spinning up a cluster from scratch and I want to take some action on it. And once we can prove that this works every time, that's basically all we, at least at the first step, that's all we care for right now. So I'm gonna kick this job off. That's gonna go, and in the next 30 minutes, we have to talk about some other things. JJ, what can we talk about?
I think we should write a simple playbook that runs the KDICE module that installs Nginx. How about that?
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So again, this job has started. If everything didn't catch fire yet, I am going to come here and try to see. Okay, so far it looks like it's doing the right thing. I'm gonna go back here and if I go here, we should see a cluster spinning up. And the task of that job is to wait until that cluster is ready to serve actual requests. So as you can see here, good luck cluster is spinning up. I was not lying to you. I wouldn't do that. So the good luck is spinning up. Again, this cluster is going to provision some VMs, install kubeadmin, no, not kubelet in them, then set up the master, then set up the networking. After that is done, it's going to also set up let's encrypt to set up the subdomain. So that is going to take some time as well after the cluster is actually completely done. So we're going to wait for that to finish. In the meantime, let's go off on the corner and create ourselves a nice little playbook for us. So very first thing in playbook development is to not put comma instead of dot, because that's what I just did. That was terrible. So code dot, that's what you should do. And I'm going to bump up the font here in a second because I know this is pretty tiny. So, okay, so let's create on the same one right here. We're going to create another task. So K8s nginx install YAML. And we already have kind of like a structure on what we need for this one. I'm going to just copy this completely over here to see what we would need. And I have so much notification from things. And I'm going to close this page up. So if you look at this, there are certain things here on the page already that is up to this much, almost are like housekeeping stuff that we have to do to be able to get all the things. So let me go over what each of these steps are doing. The very first thing here is just the name, whatever. Next is host. You need the host available. If you don't have a host key, AWX won't find this particular playbook or like list this playbook as a runnable playbook. Gather facts. I honestly am not 100% sure what gather facts does yet, but I have a gather facts key.
It pulls in information so you can do logic off of the different options. So you can like be like, oh, it's a Debian box. I'm going to use apt. Oh, it's a CentOS box. I'm going to use yum.
Okay, so I mean, again, in our use case, we actually don't need gather facts because we don't take any platform specific decisions. But again, gather facts is true. Next is connection local. We want to have that connection local because we are not connecting to an external VM. We're running everything on the machine that this Ansible playbook is running on. Next is we need 2 collection, and the collections, each of them has their specific part. One of them is IBM Cloud collection. This one lets us download the kubeconfig from our IBM Cloud account. And next is community Kubernetes. That's the one we're going to use to run the Kubernetes actions on our cluster. So next up is this IC API key, which is this IBM Cloud API key that we need to make this one work. And that's just like a variable you can set. You could also pass it directly use in the function itself that you're using. Right now we have set both. Technically, I could probably delete this one, but this is working, so I'm not going to bother. Famous last words.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tasks. So right now, let's look at the tasks. There's 2 tasks also that is nothing to do with Kubernetes, but let me tell you what they're doing. So number 1 right here is we're saving the cluster config file. What that does, it takes in the IBM Cloud API key and the cluster ID. And you might be wondering, where are you getting the cluster ID from? Are you wondering that, JJ?
Actually, I was.
Okay, good, because you should. So the reason it is going to be available to us, it is because of, which one did I do? This one? No, yes, that's the one. Okay, so in step 1 of the job that is currently running, as you can see here, in step 1, after the end of this particular task, what we do is take that output of the task and create something called the set stats that sets the data of cluster ID and passes it off to the next job. So
nice.
After the end of the cluster creation, or if the cluster already exists, we don't do anything. We just pass it on to the next job anyway. We just download the cluster's information if the cluster already exists. That's another thing in Ansible playbooks, right? When you're creating collections, I think one thing to be mindful about is thinking about side effects. Can we run this job twice, but keeping the result the same? Like that's something we have to be mindful of. And in this case, I think it is safe to say that my cluster, like this code, the way the code was written, if the cluster already exists, it will just come back and give me the information of the cluster without trying to change anything on the cluster.
Nice.
Anyway, so we come back, we know the cluster information, and now we are here. Now we have the cluster name ID. And the reason this particular key is called name ID, because in IBM Cloud, you can find a cluster either by its name or the ID. That's why probably that key was named that way. And then in that, we are passing in our cluster ID. With the IBM Cloud API key and the cluster ID, we can now find the output. Whatever the output comes back, that's where the Colin was talking about the register key. And we're then going to register this particular output. And again, this name doesn't mean anything. Whatever the output is, we're just calling it config output and storing that into config output. That's what we're doing. Now we have this variable available throughout the rest of the task that we're going to have called config output. And now we can look at this on this step. What we're trying to do is save cluster config path as fact. What this is doing is taking the cluster config that was just downloaded last step and taking that and storing the path that was created from the last step as a path. And if you are familiar with Kubernetes already, you should see where this is going, because you have the path of the config for the Kubernetes cluster. The next step to do is setting that as a kube config, which immediately we do in the next step. We set the kube config with the path we just set from the last step. Right? So if we do that, now the Kubernetes module have the kube config set, and now we can take any Kubernetes action. That's basically the secret sauce here, right? You're just setting the kube config. Now you can take Kubernetes actions. So this was already we were doing on this particular instance. What we're trying to do is create a namespace, or not create a namespace. Another thing in Ansible, you're going to see quite a lot, not just Ansible, any kind of this config what are this set of tools would be called? Automation tool, not automation. There's infrastructure automation tool.
Yeah.
Like what is right? You're going to see one tool is that they're not talking about do X, do Y. They're talking about making a state. In this case, we're trying to make the namespace state present. That basically means if the namespace exists, we're done. Just come back, do nothing. If it doesn't exist, create it. So that is kind of like how many of this, you're going to see terminology pretty often like this. So in this case, we are trying to make sure the namespace my app present in this particular cluster whenever this particular bit of task runs. And in our cluster, it's still working. So once this workflow completes, we'll see that the namespace cluster we have has a namespace called my app there. But in the next task we're trying to create, we want to probably change it up a little bit. And as we said, we're going to try to install Nginx. So let's go to the documentation and try to figure out how to achieve something like that. So Ansible K8s module. And the documentation is right here. That will tell us how to do it.
You can actually, you can actually slurp in deployment.yaml if you wanted to.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, that's. I know that we could make that happen. So the way it looks like we're doing things is have a state that we want. So state present. I think there is a few state. One is present. I think two: present or absent. Present basically means make sure this exists. Absent means make sure this gets deleted. That's kind of the two main actions that we're going to take in this. So, and the definition, after the definition, you basically are pasting in your entire Kubernetes YAML. Yeah, so let's get started. So Nginx deployment Kubernetes. It's one of the most, I think it's the most deployed thing on Kubernetes, probably, because that's every time people are learning about. This is on the official documentation on Kubernetes. This is the deployment they use. So this one.
Yeah, it's the canary in the coal mine to see if you can actually talk to Kubernetes.
Right. So let's come back here, and we're gonna say keep config is set, and state is present, and we're gonna get rid of that one. We're gonna say definition. Only thing I'm concerned with is that my spacing is gonna get all out of whack. Yep, just happened. That's okay. I think we can. Okay, hold on. I have to click and tab. That's it. That would be ensure the Nginx ensure that Nginx is deployed. Do you want to deploy it in a specific namespace?
Yeah, let's just call it and
how about we put it on the my app namespace, because that's the one we just created in the last step.
Yeah. Cool.
Right? That would be a fair thing to have done. So we're gonna create it in the my app namespace. And okay, so this is, again, if everything goes well on this particular one, after this is done, this would, there's another thing called wait. I think we want to use that. I want to make sure that this deployment is done before we move on to the next thing. Wait condition. So okay, wait. Okay, so we can just put the wait. By default, it's false, but we could put into yes. And whether to wait for certain resource kinds to end up in the desired state, by default, the mode exists once Kubernetes has received the request. That's how Kubernetes CLI works as well. When Kubernetes CLI, you say apply something, it immediately comes back. But again, in Ansible, we're trying to make sure that everything we want to start actually has started. So I think for us, I think it'll be useful if we were to say wait to yes. That's one thing about YAML is really annoying for me, is that true and false has so many different, like this is a true false statement. This is also true. This is true. This is true. This is true.
Yep.
But this is not true, by the way.
I guess that's probably the same case.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. This is true. But this is not true. This is not true. Right? I mean, I get it, but at the same time, I'm like, why? And there's also, I think, this in YAML and Kubernetes, everything YAML is true. Kubernetes doesn't have 100% parity of the true false of YAML. So yeah, just because something is valid, true false on YAML doesn't mean it's going to work on Kubernetes as well. So anyway, I'm going to just put yes. Yeah, I mean, again, most people don't face this because I think this is valid, and I think this and this is valid in Kubernetes. And when you're trying to talk about true and false, most people would probably type in true and false. So it does. People usually don't face that, but I was reading somewhere that there's one of the things in YAML and Kubernetes YAML are not 100% same. That is kind of like the gist of that story. So also the wait condition is pretty interesting because it looks like we could wait for other things as well. So far, what it looks like is that we can wait for deployment, daemon set, and pod, and for absent, we can wait for all resource kind. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to wait for the containers to get pulled down and all that jazz, right?
Right, but I think the point I'm bringing up here, you can see that the wait doesn't work for services, right? But at the same time, it's not needed because the moment you create a service gets actually created, the network rules almost instantaneously work. But we might have to look at the wait condition, which is also added at some point. We might have to look at the wait condition at some point to figure out how to wait for a specific type of resource that we haven't, not a deployment or a pod. But as of now, I think in terms of like building that, I say this is all we need to do.
All right, let's see it work.
Well, I mean, we don't have the cluster yet. I don't think it'll work just yet. But
I guess that's true.
We'll have to wait for a second. But So I'm just padding time. I'm just so yeah, the cluster master deployment is done. Now we're just finalizing workers. After that, it's gonna take good 5 to 8 minutes to set up the networking stuff, which is setting up external subdomain ingress and the let's encrypt certificate. And my application would actually wait until that is done, because so IBM Cloud, on IBM Cloud, when you spin up a cluster, by default it always sets up a let's encrypt certificate for your cluster. So for the default domain that comes with your cluster, I can show you an example of that, what it looks like. So if I were to say, what cluster am I looking at? So let's say I'm looking at a cluster Mofi ingress here. And if I were to say IKS cluster get -c Mofi ingress, that might fail because I put too much words underneath. Yeah, I'm going to have to do either the name or the ID. I put both. They're like, nope, can't have that. Okay, that didn't work either. What account I'm in? IKS clusters. Sometimes I be on different accounts. Yep, I'm on a different account. Okay, let me just show you on this account. So IKS cluster config cluster get -c. So let's, for this account, we can see that by default, we have this subdomain, ingress subdomain built for us, which is this. And we have a ingress secret built for us, which is this, which is actually using let's encrypt underneath. So the moment you deployed something on Kubernetes, you could have this particular URL, which is not pretty. I'm gonna be the first one to say this. It's not a pretty URL, but you can still get TLS, like proper TLS certification for your application, which is oftentimes like something we don't start from the get-go, and some things in the application building is different based on TLS or non-TLS. So this is pretty useful. I actually quite enjoy having like a TLS certificate right off the bat, which is very useful for me. Anyway, so let's okay, we just build the thing. Now we're gonna have to get it up to our thing. So how do we go about doing that? So we changed deleted cluster. What did he do? Cluster create was changed. What was changed? Yeah. Okay. Really? Give me 1 second. Okay. And next deployment job and git push origin master. And we push these changes. Now it's up on the cloud or GitHub for normal folks. So we have this thing pushed to GitHub. If I were to go here, we would see that we have a new task here, KTest Nginx install. That is right here, which is great. And now I'm going to quickly look at the cluster create because it looks like I made some changes, but this is fine. I think this is not something we have to worry about. So one thing we have to be mindful of, because AWX will pull these changes once we refresh the project. In AWX or Tower, I believe there is no way to see exactly what Playbook's code is, because I don't think it's, I mean, they probably thought it was redundant, but sometimes when you just made a change, you want to know that your changes were reflected up there. One way I think we have been keeping track of is by looking at this git commit, the last commit we have done there. And then I'm going to keep it open. I don't have to keep it open. I can just move off. I'm going to go to the project and I'm going to refresh this git. And after it is done, after this green dot becomes stable. And underneath what AWX is doing is just making a git clone, reclone of that. So I have F7. That doesn't look good. Was it F7?
I don't think it was.
Okay, it's supposed to be BE something. Well, boy, did we break Ansible? Okay, it's not 100% sure what's going on there, but let's try to create a job template anyway. I might be looking at something different. Let's just make sure. So if the job doesn't show up there, we know something is wrong. Do you see Nginx? Oh, the Nginx is there. Something was up. I don't know what. Why do you think? What do you think happened?
I have no idea.
Yeah. So far, actually, let's go back and try to make sure that.
So there's actually a real quick before you go any farther than this. Go back to your home or your main. And then your repo.
Okay.
So there's a religious war that we need to talk about briefly.
Okay.
So as I've been doing research into this, for our long-term sanity, it seems that right now, you want to not have one mono repo of playbooks. You want to have every playbook as its own repo. So it can have its own.
Really?
Yeah. So if you click on that playbooks repo right there, or folder, those should all three be different repos. So they can live and grow at their own pace, and they become projects for each one. Instead of AWX playbooks, it's now KS flow, KS workflow, kubectl cluster create. So if you needed to change one thing in cluster create, for instance, add a new variable or whatever, you don't have to call all the playbooks again to pull it all down. You just change that small iteration. It's a modular thing. So if you read the Ansible subreddit, which is actually pretty active, there's a couple conversations about it. And we also did that kind of thing in Chef also, from monorepo to distributed, because then what you can use is a role or a wrapper playbook to pull in the different portions. If you want to do like a soup to nuts run or something, you're like, then you do it that way. Again, it's a religious war, and you're already pretty far down the path right here, but it's one of those things that before we get too far, it's something we should at least discuss for sanity's sake.
If I have to be completely honest with myself, I can probably see the benefit of having individual repos for individual playbooks, but at the same time, we are also discussing the idea of creating these workflows and this job templates on the fly on some using the API. So if we have to create a new GitHub repo for each time, now we are going outside the territory of even AWX. We're talking about creating a GitHub repo on the fly, right? So on that aspect, I am thinking more of, because it'll be a little bit easier to control all the playbooks under the same folder, under the same GitHub repo, because we can just give permission to a couple of the folks to curate those. But at the same time, I see where you're coming from, or where this idea of having individual repos coming from. But I feel like for our use case, because we want to have some sort of level of dynamic provisioning of new workflows, I kind of am gonna probably be on the side of creating, like having a monorepo for this kind of stuff. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, CZ just mentioned, which is probably just a great TLDR of this whole conversation, monorepo until you need to start reusing playbooks, right? Which is as soon as we start making more than one workflow that does the thing, and we need to modularize it. When we have, like, we know for a fact this playbook creates a Kubernetes cluster for us every time. Now we can break that off of the mono repo into its own repo, have its own project, and now we know that this little Lego block, if you will, for the workflow will always be that and have its own thing. though this also goes into a conversation where we should, even though a lot of this is like right now, this is all public, right? We're putting this actually on public GitHub. There's a part of me that feels like we should create an organization of like IBM developer advocates playbooks or some shit, right? That we have these playbooks put there so we know that these are our blessed playbooks that do the things for us on the internet, right? I don't know. It's an idea.
No, I mean, again, it's for me, and it's probably the sysadmin in you is gonna yell at me for that. But for me, I do consider like configuration as code, but at the same time, I don't really think of configuration as like creating that level of problem if they're in the monorepo, just like code does. And that probably me not being burned enough to learn this. But at the I kind of agree with Paul here. Like try building, because adding like a individual repo for each playbook is gonna add so much overhead to get started with. I think it's gonna make it more difficult for people to onboard, because right now, if you're managing one repo, me and you can, with a person code reviewing people's pull requests to add new playbooks in here, rather than having individual repo for individual things. Now, every time you want to create a new project, every time you want to add something new, you're also going to go back and create a new project on AWX. It's just like probably adds too much overhead for at least our use case.
Okay. Well, like I said, it's a conversation we needed to have, because it's one of those things that we are going to have to figure this out at some point.
Yeah. So one thing you're gonna see that right now it says the cluster is normal. You might think, okay, it's done, everything is happy, but it's actually not. Because after the cluster creation is done, then the difficult task of setting up network stuff starts. And as you can probably see in my jobs, let me see if the job completed or not. So the workflow is running. That means I'm going to go inside. Oh, actually, never mind. I was wrong. The job finished. It's done.
Yay.
Okay, so let's just prove that what I'm trying to say has worked. Another thing I'm going to do is run the job again, right? This is what I'm going to try doing. So I think I have to log in again. So IBM Cloud login SSO. Because I do all this stream, my API key has to change quite often. I set up like a alias to log in, and I had to change my API key. Now my alias doesn't work anymore. So thanks, people. Okay, anyway, so IKS clusters, and I want to see that cluster was there. And name plus good luck. That's the name you have to give you and to get the cluster working first try, which is proven today. IKSC. What am I? Come on. Why did I get 200 here? A good luck cluster again. Copy that, paste that. Again, IKSC for me is an alias that I have created. IKSC stands for IBM Cloud KS cluster config-c. Nginx unprivileged. What is the point of running Nginx if you're going to run it unprivileged, JJ? Okay, so K get namespace NS.
Okay, so that was going back to a question I asked earlier when CZ mentioned Nginx is a bad example because it runs the processes root and listens to port 80 by default. This will fall on the cluster it will fail on a cluster that cares about security and pod security policies, which our clusters do have.
Well, OpenShift does have. IKS by default doesn't have it that turned on. You can turn it on though.
Okay. Nginx unprivileged is a good one. Yeah. Okay.
And Nginx won't work on OpenShift. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Paul. You were making a comment there, but I feel like security features are a good thing. But I understand sometimes, like when you're just starting out, having that level of tighter security is really annoying. If you're trying to do something simple and it just doesn't work without like a ton of security policies being created. But yeah, it is. Anyway, so namespace was created. It was created after the cluster was created. So as you can see, I have probably proven to you. But okay, so let's going back to the idempotency of the workflow. What I'm going to try to do now is run this flow again when the cluster already exists and see what happens. And this time, hopefully, it will come back relatively faster because the cluster already exists. Takes a second. Oh, another thing the module does, it also adds tags, JJ. So.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So if you, because our need, that's another thing we would have to do, like run a separate job for. Now it's gonna do it in one, which is nice. So this is almost finished. Once this is done, once this turns green, we're gonna go back here. This is done. We're moving on to the next thing. Again, as you can see, this time around, it took a lot less time than last time, mainly because that task was done. Okay, so we're doing the step where we're saving the cluster config file. This is just using the IBM Cloud API to download the cluster config, which is a zip file, unzipping it in the right place. And the next step would be save the config to a path. Once that is done, okay, so this all finished. As you can see on this step, change is set to 0 because again, we already saw that the namespace was present, so we do not have to create that namespace again, which is what we expect. And if I click kget namespace again, we should see that this is still the same. So okay, let's take this to the next step, and I'm gonna create a new workflow. I will probably continue to use the same cluster because I don't want to make people wait through another cluster create. Okay, did I finish the Nginx one? Yeah, I didn't. I'm gonna have to. I got distracted by shenanigans. Okay, so cube admin Nginx deploy is gonna be under this project, and it's gonna have the Nginx install. And no credential. I don't need a credential anymore because we have done away with that. And inventory would be test inventory. So that's all we need because again, although on this one, we actually need the IBM Cloud API key as well as the ID. We don't have to pass anything to this one because this is not going to be a top level job. This is going to be part of a longer chain. So this one is up to you, JJ. Do you want to add this to our existing kube admin flow or you want to create a new flow?
I feel like we should create a new flow because we'll eventually want to have, we want a demo flow of getting Nginx up and running from soup to nuts. Be able to be like, hey, now we can take your app. Then this app could be this by creating this workflow. Then we can go back to your app at a later date and say, hey, tickle this API endpoint. And you'll get a cluster called good one, good, like have fun with Nginx already running on it.
Okay. Right? So, well, we will have to copy in the IBM Cloud API key at the top level. Again, when we're actually running it, well, I'll have to first, oh God, the UI got messed up. Okay, hold on. I saved it, I think. Okay, I'll have to come back to this other one. Copy in my, again, no one steal this, please. I'll have to delete this call. But that's okay. Nginx flow, save that, go to workflow visualizer. And this, again, we have done this. We have gone through this a couple of times already. Number one was kube admin module job. That is run always, convergence any. Okay, select that. From that job, I want to create another job. That would be the namespace one. So kube admin and K8s, select that one. From that one, after the namespace has been created, I want to go to Nginx deploy. Sound good?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so let's save that. And only thing left to do is start, see what happens. Yeah, no, I think, Paul, 100%. Oftentimes when we're doing something, also ourselves, we're doing this in Kubernetes cluster that we have full admin access to, then all of a sudden we want to run this on a little bit more or in other way to say, we're trying to run this on a more production-like cluster. All of a sudden, our admin privileges are not there, and all of a sudden, our work doesn't work there. So it's generally better practice to not try to like assume that you're going to have admin privileges everywhere. And if we can write our workshops and content that way, and I have tried doing that, especially on Kubernetes, is that like another really good tool in Kubernetes is like kubectl auth can to check whether or not a certain level of permission lets you do certain things. Okay, now last one is this one. Hopefully it has both of them. Okay, it does have both of them. So this is the big ticket item. So if this works, we know this will work. We can just keep chaining at any number of jobs in this. One thing I have found between jobs, one thing we're repeating something here is that we're re-downloading the config file over and over again. The reason we have to do it is that what I have found is I tried passing the path from one job to the next one, but it seems like that path, after the task is finished, it doesn't exist anymore. It goes away. So yeah, I had to kind of, okay, now it's trying to Nginx is deployed. It has done so. I think kget po-n my app. That's it, done, JJ.
Sweet. Yay. Sweet.
Python Flask, okay. Yeah, the Python, like, again, running like a simple application. We have, so that's another thing we've been working on. Probably it's right now it's down, but I was trying to, because oftentimes we talk about these concepts in Kubernetes and we end up talking about like such a simple application, oftentimes it misses the point. And like Kubernetes is meant to do a lot more with microservices and all the other systems. So we were working on an application called btravels, and now it's not going to work because I deleted that cluster. But we'll demo this someday. But we were working on this application that has like 6 or 7 microservices. It has databases. It is talking to each other. So it's a little bit more robust than like a simple Python application. And we want to make sure it's simple to deploy, but it also can now talk about a little bit more depth rather than just having a simple Flask application. We'll come back to this some because I did it in, it's not going to go anywhere. But we deployed this, and as long as it's a simple Kubernetes stuff like this, like it's a deployment or a service or vanilla Kubernetes things, we can actually keep repeating these steps. Oh, there's a hello, Spencer. Wow, okay. Spencer got all the pull to get like custom application written for him. That is, if you, okay, yeah. So I oftentimes have like, so people sometimes would like come to a workshop or something and they'll see me showing off a like Go application. And then I'll get like one person asking a question, something like, oh, but how about Java? And at the time, initially I used to think like, okay, I mean, what answer do I give him? Because Kubernetes doesn't really care about what language you write this in. But this is a genuine question. Like people would ask, like, okay, my stream has to do something with Java. My shop totally deals with Java and nothing else. And this application looks like Go probably is not for me. So that's the reason we also started writing btravels, and our goal is to eventually write this in multiple languages so that when someone talks about, okay, I care about Java, nothing else, I can just show him the btravels version in Java so that they can relate a little bit better. But again, I digress. So JJ, what is the next step for us to take this forward? I think we can just like call it done. Where we figured it. We conquered AWX.
Yeah, I mean, we can now, we spin up clusters when we need to. We can now do post provisioning.
Well, we
Like,
have one last step we actually haven't achieved yet, and I don't know if you have noticed that. I promised we were gonna do it this way, but we haven't done it. So,
what's that?
do you know which one this is?
No.
Well, I'm still logging into my AWX UI and clicking a button to start the job.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
not
yeah,
how you want to do things.
the API. Yeah.
Yes. So let's figure out how we can run the same job. We're gonna run this job again, and just so that there's something for this to do, k delete ns my app. I'm gonna delete this namespace so that we have something to do. Hopefully it'll delete. At the same time, I'll go back and figure out what is. So I'm gonna close all my other tabs. So in AWX, we talked about how AWX has everything based on some API, and we do have that. So let's figure out what this particular workflow template is in terms of APIs. So what is this one? This is template 30. Look for the name, JJ. What is the name for it? Oh, that's the name, Cube Admin Flow. Is that the name flow we're trying to do? I don't think so. Like the flow we're trying to do is Cube Admin Nginx flow. That's the flow we're trying to do.
Yep.
So let's search for that. Oh boy, that is not there. Is it on multiple pages? Is that what it is? Okay, only flow I see is Cube Admin flow. What's up with that? There's count of 2. We have 2 total flows. Okay. So this is result array, result 1. And this is result 2. What is that? Oh, the page hasn't loaded. That's why Google Chrome can't find it. Haha, this is the one. Okay, so we have this other flow, second flow, and the second flow has this endpoint they should have called launch. If I were to make a post request to this launch endpoint with my API key, the job would just start. That's kind of like the promise. Give me 1 second. The API key for this I have to find. Okay. History. Bear with me, JJ. Export. Okay. And okay, so I have found the API key. Close this. Okay, clear. Okay, so this is the command we need to run, and the API endpoint is going to be just this bit. So, and we have to make a post request, not a get. So that's the change here. Okay. So did I not paste it? Oh, come on. Okay. And I have now 2 slashes, as one does. So so if I were to just use this curl command, make a post request to the bearer token again, you can generate tokens in the AWX UI here. Settings, I think, settings, authentication, and then get yourself some token stuff. And once you get the token, you could then just run this job. And I'm gonna be on the job side right now. As you can see, there is last job that ran was 328. That's one of the things. And k get ns, you would see there is no namespace called my app. So let's start this, and it immediately comes back saying the job started 335. As you can see, 335 has started, and Yeah, we did that too now. Yeah. Well, we'll have to wait for it to see if it did anything.
Yeah.
But
wow,
we have to.
This is really coming together.
Yeah. So as I was doing this research, right, like I was having roadblocks that I was hitting. It was mostly because I knew nothing about Ansible, right? Like it has nothing to do with the ecosystem itself. It's more so about my own ignorance about the systems. And as I like found more and more things about one thing, I just had a bunch of this islanded knowledge that was like separated in different places. And as I'm talking to folks, researching a little bit more, getting connection with Colin and whatnot, I am basically building that bridges between, which has been pretty amazing, right? Like as I'm like connecting. So one thing finished, first thing finished was second thing actually finished as well. The third one is running right now. And if I'm correct, if I do NS, I should see my app already there, but my app shouldn't have anything. It just spun up. And once we see this green turn completely green, we should be able to see that this is well, watching paint dry.
So now let's get Istio installed.
Yeah, why not? But anyway, so this is working, as you can see.
Yay!
So
excellent.
I was waiting when that's gonna show up. Yeah, I mean, again, there is nothing stopping us from installing Istio, except for a couple of things. One, the cluster we spun up is a one-node cluster that doesn't have enough resources to install Istio. That's like probably the bigger thing. And the second thing here is installing Istio requires the use of something like Istio-ctl that we'll have to write a playbook a little bit more with a little bit more care.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, there's nothing in terms of technicality, there's nothing technically difficult in doing so, right? All the steps are basically just carefully concocting a recipe that does it. But in terms of the technically difficult things, that was, at least for me, not knowing how AWS and Ansible, all of these things piece together. I think most of that has been lifted by just sheer like will and hitting my head against the wall over and over. And I feel like it was a great exercise for us to do as well in a number of ways. And one of them being, this is probably when people are trying to take on a new challenge similar, they have to do similar things, except they also have a lot of day-to-day responsibility. Oh boy, let's go, Spencer. Spencer, have a challenge for us. So I'll finish what I was saying, but I'll take the challenge, Spencer. If I can do it, that's fine. If we can't do it, that's also fine.
Yep.
But so what I was saying is, like, when people are trying to learn or like do something similar as POC, they have to like kind of carve out time. For us being developer advocates, we can actually dedicate a portion of our time a little bit more freely to do this kind of things, where a lot of people don't have that kind of freedom, right? To be able to just like spin up new instance like this or do things randomly, like try out something. But again, that's why we do this. That's why you build this like live stream, so that the next person who has to build a POC can take a shared experience from what we have learned and make new mistakes, right? Like instead of making the old mistakes that we have been making. So that's, I think in some sense, if we are adding any value, that's where we are adding some value. But let's look at what Spencer's
Oh, wouldn't we just have to add a service to Nginx there with like a node port? And in theory, that's it?
No. So we're talking about Ansible to set up an out-of-cluster service. So that's a VM.
On a VM.
So on a VM, set up MySQL, and then use that configuration to set it up in, like, use that on your Kubernetes cluster to be able to talk to that Postgres database. Okay. Let's think through this. It shouldn't be too difficult. That's famous last word one more time. Shouldn't be too difficult. So first, we need to spin up a Postgres database somewhere. Basically, that 5% of Kubernetes infrastructure that is not Kubernetes yet. Okay. So before we jump into the solution to this, let's just like have a quick peek on the Galaxy module section. Is there any Ansible stuff to spin up like a Postgres database? It is possible. They have actually, you know what? The only thing you look for, database. It doesn't have databases.
Come
Jeez,
on.
Okay. Okay. I'm looking at authors. Sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm going to look for Postgres. EDB Postgres. Oh, general has 0. Why are you showing? Okay, they have plugins for Postgres. JFrog has some stuff. Docker Postgres. Okay. Okay. So is this okay? Like a little bit of shameless plug. Isn't that project? Oh, wow. Okay, nice. All right. So Spencer just shared a link of I'm guessing a module that does stuff. Ooh, what does this do? We were just talking about this. Nice. It installs Istio, but it's a pretty. Oh yeah, that's a dated version of Istio. What are you doing, Spencer? You're not keeping it up to date to yesterday. Come on. But yeah. So this would give us a pretty good start actually on the Istio side if we just replicate that stuff. Istio client city. Okay, Kubernetes client. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think that in recent time they created this Kubernetes module that covers most of the Kubernetes client stuff you have done, or more than that. Here, this installed the IBM Cloud client. I think IBM Cloud CLI. Yep. Nice. This is cool. Thanks, Spencer. I can steal most of it to make something out of them. So to talk, going back to Spencer's challenge, right? Like we want to spin up some sort of like a VM or some sort of database somewhere. And that could be on a VM, that could be even like a managed service of some kind. Now then taking that information and bringing it back. So if we were to say spin up, let's say we spin up a VM from an Ansible playbook. After the end of that playbook call, we have the URL to that VM. Inside that VM, if we were to spin up like a Docker Compose Postgres database, then we have that URL and what endpoint that Postgres database is running in. Take that information back into our application, make that into a variable, apply that YAML. So another nice thing about Ansible is any field here on the list, if we were to make this like this, now this is dealt like a variable that available here on my environment. So yes, we can probably do it, but it's gonna take some time. So maybe we can put that off for another stream where you can show off how to do that. But Spencer, I'm gonna admit forfeit and not gonna take this challenge live because I feel like yeah, I think yeah, we can yeah, for example, if you have a VM already, you can do that on that VM as well. But ideally, that's kind of like the thing we were talking about, JJ, a couple of days ago, right? Once you kind of get into that whole automation lifestyle, anything can, and everything can be automated. It's just a matter of just putting the right concoction down. And it's a lot of trial and error, especially when you're just learning about this kind of stuff. But once you get over the technical hurdle of a bunch of these things, it just opens up so many doors. It
really does.
It's basically just insanity. I sometimes, like in my sleep, think about how we can automate this. But I think what would be really cool is one of the sessions having like writing your own collections. That would be really interesting to do. And another thing would be really interesting to do is coming back to like building the SDK that we're talking about using Go to talk to AWX automatically. So that's another session we could do. We can either live code something, or I can have something pre-built. We can show off, like making a REST API call on my application, then that application talking to Ansible AWX to start a job or create a new job or something. I think those are like, a couple of sessions. And so this is kind of like the part of technology where I know what needs to be done. I just got to go back and do it, which is oftentimes like the most boring part, but the most useful thing, right? Figuring out a technical problem is probably the most fun, but also the most useless, because it doesn't actually get you anywhere unless you actually sit down and do it. So we had our fun, JJ. Now it's time to sit down and do it.
It's true. Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess unless there's something else that you want to work on, I guess it's a pretty good place for us to stop.
I feel like today's session was, I mean, I can't speak for the audience, but for me, it was a really great session to have Colin come and talk us through kind of like the ecosystem itself. Also verifying that our intuition had been at least on the right path. And yeah, that has been my takeaway from this today's session, and can't thank Colin enough for taking the time. Hopefully we can get him again some other time once we have a more full system built, so that he can do a review on what it looks like. Is it something he is impressed by or disappointed by our work? That would be something we can come and talk about.
Awesome. Well, I'll give it a couple seconds here. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Give it a second or so. Just for shits and giggles, while people were debating that, while Mofi, you've been working on that, I have been attempting to get, so I just created a playbook that creates a Debian machine for me on my my verse box, my KVM box. And as you see here, I'll launch it. It actually uses AWX, talks to Ansible, SSHs into my machine called OOD, actually clones the base machine, then syspreps the machine, and starts it. And if you come over here, verse list, there it is. But the funny part is I can't actually SSH into it. So I don't know, and it's very frustrating. It doesn't actually seem to do what I want. So if I do list -- all, if I actually start up this machine, first start Debian 10 base, then I go SSH admin Debian 10 base. I can get in just fine. So the base machine I can SSH into, but if I try to SSH into Docker Debian, I get a connection reset of port 22, which is weird. Yeah, so I don't know. That's literally what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the day, trying to figure out what the hell's going on there, because I still haven't given up on the playbook that SSHs in to a machine, runs Docker to build a container to run something. I haven't given up on that yet.
Yeah, you gotta just like throw in Chef, Puppet, and Terraform somewhere, and you have
Yeah.
the full bingo of
That is true.
infra automation bingo. You can cover all of them.
There you go.
Okay, I think this is a good spot to stop.
Yep.
We will be playing around with it more sometime, hopefully next week again, Friday, same time, probably.
Probably.
Yeah, and we'll probably have something more cool things to show you at that time. By that time, if I have the integration with the application by then, that would be actually really cool. But again, we can't promise anything. Maybe
Yep.
we will take on Spencer's challenge and see what if we can get that working with Kubernetes, talking to a VM, making some application of some kind.
Yeah. Or we could spin up AWX on another machine, on another Kubernetes cluster, and then
From
have the database. The database on the
from
VM.
one AWX to another. It's like use AWX to spin up more AWXs.
Yeah. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, I mean
All right.
they have a module for AWX too. So
Yeah. Why not? All right. Well, thanks everybody. Bye.